Airplane pilots of Reddit, what was your biggest we're all screwed up moment that you survived and your passengers didn't notice? I used to fly photographers to southern Utah and Colorado to survey land. One day I had a fuel indicator malfunction and I realized we were 10 minutes away from our engine shutting off. Landed at a small airport we passed a bit ago while running on fumes. The photographer had no idea that if we didn't land, we would have had to ditch the plane in the hot desert with no cell reception or hope of getting recused for a while. Holy balls dude, if you are still flying in an area where there is no cell phone reception and your radio won't work for whatever reason, for the love of God get a sat phone. The plans are not very expensive. Better than dying of thirst in a desert. Learned from the experience and have one now. I also carry survival gear equipped for the terrain I plan on flying over now also. Not a pilot, but this was the scariest plane landing I experienced. I was flying into MSP on a standard commercial airliner. In the seconds before the tires touched the runway, the plane rolled hard to the left. The plane made an equally hard recovery just before the plane's back wheels hit the runway. The sequence of events was boom, boom, boom. The plane landed safely. As the passengers were disembarking, one of the pilots stood outside the cockpit door pale and sweating. He shook every passenger's hand on the way out. I don't know much about aviation, but I always thought that plane just barely avoided a crash landing that day. Airline pilot here. Flying into MSP while green, under 100 hours in type, had my first experience circumnavigating a thunderstorm passing overhead. Think of that GIF where ATC routes all the planes around a storm. We had to re-enter the full arrival procedures at least 3 times because of storm movement. During the constant re-routes we had lightning striking, I learned lightning looks very blue, which destroyed radio communications making it take much longer than it should. The turbulence was strong but not overly strong. However, it did make trying to re-enter arrival info very difficult. Over time multiple other aircraft had to divert since flying around the airport instead of directly at it is not very efficient. We were mulling over making that decision since we couldn't be certain that we would get in this time. Finally, I'm on final approach, it's still my leg flying. Captain decides that since I'm green that he's gonna take over. I was a bit annoyed because although the wind was very strong, it was stable. Everything seemed fine until about 200 feet off the runway when the wind sheared hard and the plane was violently shaking around. We would have gone around except that by the time it stabilized we had touched down. Felt glad that he took over. Anyways, what you're describing sounds like wake turbulence. Basically your plane flew into another aircraft's wake. One outcome is a very sharp but somehow stable roll. Not quite the answer you are looking for, but once I was on a military exercise out in Hawaii. One of the aircrafts had engine problems at the end and they fixed it good enough to make it back home when we were leaving and got told who is going on what aircraft I so happened to be put on that one. Not I'm scared of flying but flying over the ocean in a helicopter knowing if the engine gives out you are dropping like a rock put me on the edge of my seat a little bit. My uncle was an airplane pilot and trainer for decades. He also built small single-engine prop planes for himself and others. He crashed 2 of them. I think both times he ran out of gas while flying. I asked him, how the fuck do you do that? Can't you check your gas gauge? But these small planes don't have gas gauges. You fill them up and know how long they run for. But if you have a leak in your gas lines, then you run out of gas. Which he did twice. Walked away from both of them. On a side note, he also took a plane out of Cuba and they told him they were going to shoot him down, but he just noped out of there at low altitude. It was his friend's plane but had been confiscated by the Cuban government. Pilots back then were freaking real-world cowboys. Pilot for one of the majors here. 5 a.m. on New Year's Day, our first flight that morning, and my foe and I were both extremely hungover, having had a layover in Vegas. The night before, our entire flight crew had gone out drinking at about 8 p.m. and did not get back to our crash pad until nearly 3 a.m. We were all extremely intoxicated. I actually threw up out the window of the Uber taking us to McCarran. Typically, we do a walk-around inspection, but it was a short hop to LAX and we were both still drunk/hungover and tired. By the time we got to the gate, they had already boarded a couple of the groups, so we just flashed our badges, walked down the ramp and set up in the cockpit, hoping not to make eye contact with anyone. Get on board, lock the cockpit door and my foe pulls out a couple mini bottles of Absolute that he had stashed. Hair of the dog? He asked, and I gladly took one, anything to make my headache go away. One of the FAs calls us to let us know everyone was seated and with that we request pushback and start up the engines. We taxi out and I'm half asleep, reading through a text thread from the attendant I'd woken up with, just an hour earlier. Traffic was light, so we were number 2 in line, we're given the okay, so we throttle up, pick up speed, rotate and I was jolted awake by this weird feeling. Immediately, the jet began climbing at an incredible rate, almost straight up. We were pushed back in our seats and as I watched our speed indicator slow and head toward a stall, I realized we had not removed the gust lock from the elevators. A locking device that keeps control surfaces from moving while the plane is on the ground. In a situation like that, there isn't much you can do, except keep the throttle pushed all the way forward and pray the aircraft doesn't stall in the climb. My foe was wide awake by this point also and yelled, as we were in a nearly 45-degree climb. It was at that moment, he yelled out something I'll remember for the rest of my life: if you wanted real answers, you should have put a serious tag on this. Okay, this is sort of relevant here. I flew a tanker plane in the Air Force. From time to time when at home station we'd give incentive rides to folks from around the base, people who'd won Airman of the Quarter for different groups or squadrons, that kind of thing. So while not a passenger plane normally, we had about 30 packs on board for a routine mission where we'd refuel some fighter jets in training and all the packs could watch them and get down in the boom pod and stuff. I'm a youngish co-pilot. The pilot is this guy, not even in our flight squadron anymore, attached to us, but I think he ran the control tower. Nobody really liked flying with him and he really didn't like flying with anybody, hated all of the co-pilots except, for some reason, me. Probably he hated me but realized I was the only one left and kept his mouth shut. We taxi out from the tarmac to the end of the runway, and we're sitting there waiting for traffic to clear. Our base was located near a major commercial airport and depending on wind and time of day we might have to wait a couple of minutes for takeoff. Nothing whatsoever has been out of the ordinary. As we're waiting, I notice a red-tailed hawk, I think, anyway, flying by. I pointed out to the rest of the people in the cockpit, since we're not doing anything else. Hey, look at that hawk. Like a stupid overeager co-pilot, you know. Everybody looks, everybody goes back to their conversation. I watch the hawk. I watch it fly from left to right across the nose of the airplane, slip a bit right, turn, and take a gainer right into engine number 3. I mean, clear as day, that bird was suicidal. It turned and dove into the engine. We're not flying. But technically this qualifies as a bird strike. Nonetheless, you know how you could become super unpopular with, like, everybody? Say, hey, that hawk just dove into number 3. Seriously. I think the pilot was ready to choke me out. Are you fucking kidding me? You saw it? You saw it fly into the engine? Are you fucking kidding me? He gets on the radio. We gotta go back, we took a bird. Well, the co-pilot says we took a bird. Cleared onto the runway, taxi down to the first exit, taxi back to the ramp. Pilot keeps bitching me out the whole time. There better be a shitload of fucking bird guts in that engine or I'll fucking murder you, that kind of uplifting stuff, reasons why he was so popular to fly with. Interspersed with bitching about how stupid I am, he keeps telling me to keep my damn feet off the pedals because the thing isn't steering right and he thinks I'm hitting the brakes. Which I'm not, but, you know. I'm not in a position to say much. Of course all the packs are totally bummed. It's not like we're just going to toss them on another airplane and do the mission anyway. I seriously don't know why we wouldn't. There were spare jets, but what the fuck ever. I was an LT, this was above my pay grade. Probably so were bird strikes, honestly, so they'd missed out on the flight. I felt really shitty, to be honest. They unload the jet, we're getting ready to ride back to maintenance for debrief when one of the maintainers opens up number 3, feathers and blood. Holy shit was I glad to see that. Back at maintenance debrief, we're wrapping up when another guy comes in. Hey, the nose wheel bearings that thing are worn down flat on one side. You said it was hard to steer coming back? Yeah, that's why. Shit, if you tried to land on that thing it could have seized up. I don't remember enough anymore about the details of it, this was like 2004, but basically, if we'd taken off the nose wheel might have seized up on landing, which might have put everyone at risk if the plane had to skid down the runway to stop or the nose gear actually snapped. Probably wouldn't have happened, but maybe. Maybe I saved everybody's life, or, Well, afternoon. Or that hawk did. Okay, this is a reported incident and the details are online, but my guy didn't want me to link it all up. He's a retired captain and a man of many stories, he asked nicely, so I've changed the airport and airline. On approach to Vienna, his MD-81s, it's a variant of the MD-80, itself a variant of the DC-9, nose gear didn't lock. On an MD-81, you can't visually inspect the nose gear, so he had no damn idea of the state of his wheels. The MD-80 series has really far back wings, from the cockpit, so the center of gravity is really far back. The nose wheel not locking is really quite an issue, it can't keep the nose up during deceleration as easily as planes with more forward center of mass, the elevator has less of a moment. I'd have probably lost the airframe, Captain Austrian says, if that nose gear had collapsed. We were doing a slam dunk approach, for first officer training, and probably should have declared a missed approach. Instead, we landed it. The gear held successfully, and the cause was found to be a broken wire to the indicator lamp for the nose gear.